You're listening to Productivity Protected, the podcast that's all about data privacy and security. We'll unpack emerging threats, hot issues in data security, and top ways to protect your data and how you work. Here's your host, Spencer Kupferman.
Welcome back to the Productivity Protected podcast. We've got a fantastic show here for everyone today. Great content, a very serious content that we're talking about here in the cyber world today. We have a fantastic guest. Before I introduce that guest, I want to wish all of our listeners, our partners, our customers, and anybody associated with our Productivity Protected podcast a very happy, healthy, prosperous new year. Hope 23 will be a great year for all of us and for all of you who tune in. So happy new year. And here we are at the Productivity Protected podcast, and we are talking about why cybersecurity needs ethical hackers. And toward that end, I want to introduce the one and only hacker extraordinaire, Michael Goetzman. Michael Goetzman, and if I can, I'm going to read this bio because this bio reads, the amount of certifications on here, I'm not going to list every certification, but I'll tell a little bit about Michael and his prowess as a hacker, looking to get Michael to share with us his thoughts. I'll give a little bio on Michael. Then I'm going to tell Michael to tell us a little bit about his story and how he came into this line of work and into hacking. And so I think what's important to note is that Michael Goetzman runs Wisconsin's largest technology event. For those of you who know Michael, you'll know CypherCon. That conference is called CypherCon. And when Michael's not organizing CypherCon, again, the largest technology event in Wisconsin. And for those of you who don't know Wisconsin, Milwaukee, this whole hub is becoming a hotbed of technology. Great universities around. There's a lot of access to great technology talent. And Michael is harnessing that through CypherCon. So here's something for you. Michael enjoys experimenting with genetics, biohacking, hacking connected devices, which most people are familiar with, that concept, cloud security, privacy applications, another very important issue, and examining the confidentiality of critically sensitive connected products, medical devices, and electronic medical records. We know data protection. We know that's what we do at PKWARE. That's such an important critical area of cyber hygiene is protecting data. And so we know a little bit about that at PKWARE. Michael holds an MS, a Master's of Science in Business Management, involving international healthcare studies in Havana, Cuba, along with earning his CISSP. You're all familiar with that certification. Michael has over 10 certification in his free time. I know our listeners want to know what Michael does in his free time. I'd like to know what Michael does in his free time. Enjoys exotic rides in the Zeppelins, soaring in experimental planes. Wear your seatbelt, Michael. And piloting colorful hot air balloons around rural Wisconsin, beautiful rural Wisconsin, I might add. And Michael believes in freedom of non-harmful information. I'm going to sign up for that. Equality before the law. I'll sign up for that. The advancement of scientific fringe research by the way of individual imperatives. So without further ado, I'm going to let Michael talk about all of these things, start by telling his story before we jump in to these questions around the need for ethical hackers. Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Goetzman.
Thanks, Spencer, and Happy New Year. Happy New Year to all our listeners. It's going to be an awesome year, and it's all what we make of it, right? So I don't even know where to begin, right? I'll start off with all those certifications, right? I pick one certification a year of where I want to evolve and take it on. So after 10 years, it kind of starts piling on, right? And wearing my seatbelt on experimental airplanes. I have a Canon powered parachute. So if anything goes wrong, I'll just come down on the parachute. And so where did this all begin? I like to deconstruct things. You see all these pinball machines behind me. It's a mix of hardware and software, and I love just getting my hands in there and messing with the mechanicals and making sure the software connects up, right? And which led me to Internet of Things and medical devices and smart city. And it's all about tinkering, deconstructing, creating something new, and finding creative ways to manipulate this world, right?
That's great. I mean, that's great. I did notice all of the pinball machines there. Was going to ask about that. I'm glad you told our audience. Okay, let's just jump in and let's talk about why we're here, which is why cybersecurity needs ethical hackers. And like I said, you're the one and only here with us. Maybe tell us, let's get specific. Tell us a little bit about your journey in working in networking and servers and just, being a full-time cybersecurity expert and ethical hacker. Why don't we start there?
So it all started in middle school, high school. I was caught breaking into systems. Here you have this free range labs that teachers aren't really watching you. So I went at it and see how far I could break in and make them, do what I want, right? And I was pulled into the principal's office, and they're like, you get two options. We're gonna send you home. We're gonna call your parents, or you can work with us over the summertime and help us make a better, a better computer environment for learning. So I got my first job, essentially through hacking. And I found, hacking doesn't make a lot of sense unless you understand how computers work. So suddenly I'm doing networking. Got out of high school, went in, got an associate's degree in networking, said this isn't enough. I want to learn servers. Went into a bachelor's degree learning how systems work, right? Said this is still not enough. Went for an MBA while I was doing applications, and then slowly going into cybersecurity. Now we're talking, that brings us up to 10 years ago. A lot of hacking along the way, going to hacker meetups. Back then it was like hush tones, right? You gotta, you don't use your real name. You learn all sorts of things you can manipulate, from cars to connected devices that were early, cellular towers, that kind of stuff, right? Eventually, you have to pay the bills. So you end up leaving the education system, going into business. You pick up what it takes to tick this world, right? And roll up the sleeves, dive in, starting at help desk, networking, systems, and work your way up to leadership. And here I am.
That's a great story. I just for our listeners, just for the record, I also went to the principal's office. It was not for hacking computers. We'll leave it at there. That's maybe for another podcast, another time. Appreciate you sharing that exciting part of your journey. Let's keep going, because now you referenced your hacking background and how we got there. At first glance, the term ethical hacking seems like a bit of maybe a contradiction to some of us. I'm sure some of our listeners are already familiar with this concept. Can you, for the ones that aren't, could you maybe get into folks who are newer to cyber and technology in general? Could you maybe help us unpack what ethical hacking is in this day and age and why we need it?
So great question. I view ethical hackers as the digital MacGyvers. We're countercultural. We don't like to fit into the mold that the traditional education system is sending everybody down. We like to think for ourselves. We like to be creative. We like to use our ingenuity to dissect what's really happening, look at that bigger picture, and dive into the details, right? So when you get an iPhone or a Droid, like, who really controls you? And is it the mega corporations that's telling you how you should behave on these devices? Or do you own that device and you can pull it apart and look at how it works and manipulate it to make it even better? So I view ethical hackers as a pivotal piece of our society that keeps checks and balances in place. We want to have more freedom. We want to protect the average person who's looking at those devices to make sure that data is not being abused, right? Do you really rely on mega corporations? Do you really rely on potential evil governments that have different agendas? So ethical hackers like to explore and evaluate what's really happening and then release that to everybody and share that knowledge.
This is incredibly important work. The way you described it was a fantastic definition for our audience. I guess in their efforts to protect their organizations from outsider malicious hacking, just for example, ethical hackers are likely to encounter highly sensitive information just in their line of work. I'm sure you've been there. How do organizations protect that kind of data from their own internal hackers?
So an inside threat, if it's crossing a line, they're no longer hackers. They're definitely not ethical hackers. They're straight up criminals. Ethical hackers stay within the rules and don't break laws. So if you have somebody internal that is causing problems, that's a criminal, and that's a different scenario.
So yeah, let's keep going with that. So obviously, ethical hackers can't dig in to the same degree as you referenced a malicious hacker might. They want to stay within the confines of the legalities of the environment. What are some of the limitations of ethical hacking? And I guess, how does an ethical hacker work around those to make sure that the organization that ethical hacker is representing remains safe?
So ethical hackers are indeed at a severe disadvantage compared to a criminal that's actually trying to break into your system. When you talk to a CISO or leaders of an organization, they tend to like to make artificial rules stopping somebody from testing the system. So they're like, oh, like we really can't have you go over to that system over there. That's our critical process. Don't mess with that. Well, the criminals aren't going to stop at that point, right? So the best way to work with ethical hackers and pen testers is to trust that they're able to keep the system up while they're testing vulnerabilities or weaknesses in those systems. So as soon as you place scoping and limitations, you're severely setting your scanning and your awareness of what your system's capable of back. So my advice is trust in who you're hiring to test your systems, get real vulnerabilities, and get real actions to protect your systems.
That makes sense. Sometimes we have trouble. Even the strongest system deterrents can't account for sometimes nefarious behaviors. So obviously doing all we can do to make sure that those environments are secure makes a lot of sense to me. I mentioned this in the bio, the CypherCon. I want to spend a few minutes on that if we can here. By creating this hacking event, CypherCon, right in the heart of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, as we referenced earlier, I'm just curious, what was your inspiration? I think our listeners kind of want to know. We might have some ethical hackers here on the line listening to this, and maybe they want to do something, maybe represent something similar down the road for their communities. What was your inspiration behind creating this event, and how have you seen it really impact cybersecurity, which is, really at the whole crux of this industry, really impact cybersecurity in the world, if you will, over the last handful of years, 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, so the origin story of CypherCon was never an intention of becoming a conference itself. Rural Wisconsin has 1 or 2 hackers in each small little village town, sprawled out miles and miles across Wisconsin, right? And I found myself going to 5 to 10 different little like mini events, one in Green Bay, one in Madison, one in Milwaukee, et cetera, all with different, scopes and purposes. And I'm like telling each one of these groups, I'm like, why don't we like do something really big, 100 people, once a year and bring everybody together? And I found myself, telling everybody, and I realized I'm the person that needs to do this. So I'm like, okay, what's a good origin story? I'm like, the Safe House, a Cold War themed bar downtown Milwaukee. I'll sell 100 tickets for $100. We'll have, 5 speakers, right? And it would be more of a social get together of like, wow, look at all these hackers that we have in Wisconsin. We never met each other because we're so sprawled out. Suddenly I found myself, I sold out of tickets immediately. And some of the groups were getting mad at me. They're like, why did you tell that group before our group? Like, we wanted to come, right? And you're sold out. So we turned it into a 2-day event. And we ended up with 350 people our first year. And, here we are year 6 and we're, over 1,000 attendees. You can come to a hacker conference without identifying as a hacker. And usually when you leave the event, you realize you've been a hacker your whole life. Like, you don't fit into that cookie cutter, what society wants you to be. And there's, 50 different ways of manipulating technology. You found that one particular that you really enjoy, you're effective at, and you go back to your organization and you apply that knowledge in the real world. So the origin story of CypherCon, I think, is pretty unique. And that's our recipes for success. Is we're all about the individual. We're all about elevating the community and freely sharing that like non-harmful information. We make these simulated environments that mimic the real world, and you're free to play with it as much as you would like. So yeah, the next CypherCon is going to be March 30th, 2023, downtown Milwaukee. Everybody's invited.
No, that's powerful to see, what comes out to me in that explanation and giving the background around CypherCons, your passion for providing this venue for your colleagues, not just around the Wisconsin area, but really around the country and maybe even the world. And now you're over 1,000 strong and growing every year. And I think, there's so much good that comes from that. And I like also that you don't actually have to be a hacker to really enjoy it. I'm not a hacker. Hey, for those of you out there listening and want to go to CypherCon next year, Michael would love to have you. I'm already signing them up for you, Michael. We'd love for you to come to CypherCon, come to the great city of Milwaukee, and take part in this great event. And I guess, why don't we get time for one more question here? I'd love to conclude because I feel that's a good segue into, what are you, when you look in the future of CypherCon and really just the greater hacking community, if you will, what's standing out to you? What is it that you could put your finger on and really look at and say, okay, here's a dynamic that we should be watching out for. Here's a dynamic that could change things one way or the other. I'm just curious what your thoughts might be around, of course, your excitement for the future of CypherCon, but I think that kind of dovetails into, what your take is just on the whole community at large for hacking for the immediate future.
Yeah, probably the best question yet, right? Forward looking and projections are always exciting, right? Look at the state of the world. The state of the world is struggling with economies, wars, inflation. Things are getting harder than they were pre-pandemic, right? That means they're going to get desperate. And they're going to start looking for, the criminals are going to get desperate. They're going to start looking for ways to, manipulate the system and run away with people's belongings, right? Hackers are here to protect society. They're going to tell you straight out what's really happening and not try to sugarcoat it with PR or government, releases. We're the barometer of what society really has to fight against. However, I'm optimistic. Hackers have this whole cyberpunk vibe to them, where we got, even on my shirt, some skulls and crossbones, and we got to have that like mean, secretive on the wires, like protection, right? And that's more of a costume. Things are evolving more to like a solar punk, like positive, like let's not have this dystopian future. Let's have this better future for everyone. I'm applying that at CypherCon. So CypherCon is becoming more inclusive. We're going to have an executive summit. So we have 5 tracks. One of them is an executive line. 3 of them are for hackers, technical, like cryptography, privacy. And then we're going to have a 101 track, introductory track. If you don't know anything about this, there's a place for you. If you lead your technical staff, there's a place for you. And if you are technical and you do identify as hacker, there's 3 tracks for you. So that's really who we're aiming for, right? But if we want to elevate society and the community, it's to be inclusive and include everybody from the CISO down to the intern, right? And so the future is going to have a lot of challenges, and that's right up our alley as hackers to overcome those challenges and elevate everybody.
I feel safer already just standing here and doing this with you, knowing that there are folks like yourselves on those hacking front lines, if you will, pushing back against the spin, against those, as I referenced before, those nefarious actors who are trying to take things that aren't rightfully theirs, and knowing that the future is bright, that you have a sense of optimism, as you would know, being in that trench every day, as you would know, like you said, without the spin, know what's really going on out there, and how dangerous some of these opportunistic criminals are getting because of the state of the world. I think that's a great and accurate depiction of where we are right now. However, we have wherewithal to push back on that. We have folks like Michael Goetzman and his colleagues who are out there making things happen. We have institutions like CypherCon who are making sure that we have venues and institutions where these folks who are pushing back against this evil are in one place to commiserate, to strategize, and to be able to do what's necessary to maintain those freedoms that we hold dear in some of these areas that you've referenced before. We are at a time. I want to thank you for sharing these insights, and I hope you'd love to come back again. I want to thank all of our customers and our partners, and again, wishing all of you a happy and healthy and prosperous, meaningful new year, being appreciative for all the reasons that we should be appreciative. As Michael has articulated, there is a tremendous amount of hope and optimism for the future because of people like Michael Goetzman. Honored to have you here on the Productivity Protected podcast. We were here talking about why ethical hackers are just so critical to the cyber space. So again, Michael, thanks for joining us here on the Productivity Protected podcast.
Thanks, Spencer. Thanks, PKWARE, for being involved in the community, and thanks to all the listeners. Would love to see you at one of the events and elevate everybody. Thanks. That's awesome. Thank you, and stay tuned to Productivity Protected podcast. I'm your host, Spencer Kupferman with PKWARE, the CEO of PKWARE. Thank you for tuning in today.
Thanks for joining us on today's episode of Productivity Protected. Learn more about how PKWARE protects data and workflows by visiting pkware.com, and join us next time for more insider information on protecting data wherever it lives and moves.